Fios is not cable. We're wired differently, which means you can get the fastest internet available with equal upload and download speeds from 50 to 500 megs. So you can upload 200 photos before your favorite song is finished. Click the ad and switch to Fios today to get our best offer ever.
This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
Good morning, Dodge. The Bank of Japan's negative interest rate was just being introduced. What are they signaling to the market with this move?
Well, good morning, Ibrahim. Well, it's signaling that the global weakness of inflation is more prevalent around the world, and the fact that this could spark renewed fears of so-called currency wars as a monetary stimulus in Europe and Japan weighs on both the euro and the yen. It was a surprise 8 days ago. It was indicated that there wasn't going to be a consideration of negative rates. So I think the interpretation is that we have to be very careful and that the weapons that can be used now are becoming fewer and more extreme. And so it also will put pressure on the U.S. dollar and also what the Fed is going to do going forward.
We saw that this is only only the new deposits being held by the BOJ. Is there a reason why they want to focus on the new BOJ deposits rather than running it across the board?
They don't want to hurt bank profits. Commercial banks are unlikely to cut rates paid on household and corporate bank deposits below zero. So if it was across the board, bank profits will be reduced. So in effect, this is in support of the bank and also the household and corporate bank deposits. At this point, they just could not afford to have across the board. And it really is very much what the Swiss National Bank has done. It is in different layers, and yes, it is complex, but it does try to address the areas where it can be addressed.
We saw that Sweden and Switzerland, as you rightly pointed out, has introduced negative interest rates. Did it work for them? Did it work for Europe?
Well, it's very interesting now. Over a fifth of global GDP is now covered by central banks with negative rates. The ECB and the Bank of Japan together represent about 21%, and you add another 2.5% to 3% with Switzerland, Sweden, and Danish. They all have negative interest rates, and so it's not the banks are in a similar position in absolute terms that the economy needs to be supported. But in relative terms, the impact of negative interest rates is going to be much more significant in an economy like Japan and across the ECB as opposed to the other countries. So the fact that we are now having the major global currencies really reflect negative interest rates, it is a concern, and it will put additional pressure on what the Fed does over here in the U.S.
We saw some of the shocks being absorbed by the US dollar because of the systemic safeguards they have. Do you think there are systemic safeguards in place for yen to ensure that yen remains to be one of the more popular currencies other than the US dollar?
Well, yes, we're watching. I think the market traders, the foreign exchange traders, are really looking for yen 115 to the dollar. That appears to be the line that most analysts to be that cannot be crossed by the Bank of Japan. Should the yen appreciate beyond that point, companies like Toyota, along with other Japanese manufacturers, are likely to lower their earnings outlook and put off capital expenditures, and that will obviously have more significant impact on the Japanese economy and what they can do in the future. So there is going to have to be a close monitoring and support of the yen. Also, you're watching the yuan, and so there is a threat now that there will be across the board lowering or an attempt to lower, an attempt to game the system, but I think most economies have seen that that's not helped and benefited in the past. So we're hopeful that there will be more of a consolidation between the global banks, the international banks, to try to work together, particularly with the U.S., so that the world is moving in one direction.
Now, I know we can't read the minds of the FOMC folks, but do you think the Fed can draw some lessons from the BOJ negative rate move?
Oh, yes. They should consider using negative rates to counter the next serious downturn. Even our former chairman, Ben Bernanke, said that. there's something that the Fed will probably consider if the situation arises. And if you take a look, the 2-year U.S. dollar, U.S. Currency now, the most policy sensitive, has collapsed 32 basis points from the December peak. So we're well under where we were when the Fed originally hiked, the beginning of the hike. So we suspect that there is going to be an interest by the Federal Reserve to return to an easier policy and to be more in line with what's going on with the rest of the world.
Staying on the U.S., in the next 24 hours, we will see the first primary elections being flagged off. Are there any interesting things we can draw from the Iowa primaries?
Oh, my, yes. I mean, we certainly have had quite an interesting and fun time watching what's been happening in Iowa coming next week. From what I understand, a wide range of senior Republicans have indicated that if Trump wins Iowa, he'll more likely be the nominee. One factor that continually comes up, an Iowa victory over Cruz would validate opinion polls showing Trump in command of the race. So the Trump phenomenon would officially become more of a reality. Yes, we're just in the beginning of the season, but it is an important step for the Trump organization to take. And it will be of great interest as we go into New Hampshire, and then I think there'll be a break, Abraham, and then I think we'll see whether what happens with Trump or with the other Republican candidates. And then, of course, there'll be more of a connection between what's happening with the Republican Party and what's happening over with the Democrats.
Yesterday, the New York Times endorsed Hillary Clinton as their candidate, and she's clearly the front runner for the Democrat Party. However, they also endorsed Republican John Kasich as well, but he's lagging behind his own nomination or his own polls in his own party. Do you think with the New York Times endorsement, this would help John Kasich's case to actually win the nomination?
It would, although the New York Times has shown its colors in the past, so this is not particularly a significant indication of what's going to happen. I think the Times endorsement is obviously going to affect Kasich much more than it will Hillary Clinton. And yes, I think it will be really, there's going to have to be some decisions made as to which way the Republican Party is going to go, whether they're going to go with an outsider or they're going to try to stay mainstream with the candidates they're choosing. So I think that this is one of the more important races that we've seen for the president, and I think is one of the more interesting ones. And it certainly, as an outsider, gives much more of a flavor about what's happening in the U.S. these days.
Let's move on to commodities. We saw oil rebounded very well as gold. Do you think that gold futures tipping higher is driven by the strengthening of the U.S. dollar? Well,
it's interesting that gold is amidst. You're seeing gold increase amid slumping stock markets and also decline in the price of oil. So declines in gold last year actually resulted in great part by the belief of a robust Fed tightening and higher interest rates providing higher yielding alternatives to gold. Obviously, gold doesn't offer a yield, so that really was a very negative environment for gold to be in. Trading in interest rates futures Friday suggested that the market is now expecting only one rate increase this year. So this really would be good for gold. Gold pricing is also set for a gradual recovery in any case this year as demand in Asia increases and also mine production contracts. So there is a confluence of events that will make gold a more economic alternative given the perception of less interest rate increases this year.
Would other global sluggishness, perhaps, for instance, in Japan and other areas, affect this kind of trending from happening?
It could. I suspect that stocks with yields will be impacted more greatly than oil as a commodity. And so what happens, particularly in Asia and Japan, et cetera, is going to be extremely important to gold. More so than just India, which has traditionally been a great influence on what's happening with gold. We're really looking at what's happening in Japan and China. Those will be the two major areas that will impact the price of commodities, particularly gold.
Right. Thank you, Dodge. Have a good week ahead. That was Dodge DodgeDorland, Chief Investment Officer of LandorFuestCapitalManagers Capital Managers in New York.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.
This year, I will chew 117 number 2 pencils.
I will doodle 9 Staples notebooks to death.
When it comes to school supplies, it's guaranteed your kids will go through a lot.
I'll make a whole lot of paper airplanes.
I will lose my backpack.
That's why you get guaranteed savings for back to school at Staples.
I'll give away my last pen to Nathan in math class.
Get guaranteed savings at Staples, and right now, one subject notebooks for just a penny with a $5 purchase. Staples, that was easy. Valid on select SKUs while supplies last. Limit 6, ends 8/25/12.